Good afternoon. I think we are about to start. If everyone can take their seats, I would highly appreciate that. So good afternoon. I'm so pleased to see you all. I think this is such an important event, and I'm very pleased to give you all a very warm welcome to this very special event, the day of today. We have online participants, so very much welcome to the online participants, and then of course to all of you in the room. And as you know, the occasion for this event we have today is that we are launching a very important shells. It's a study called the integration of mental health and psychosocial approaches in accountability mechanisms for atrocity crimes. And I think this is a very important topic, but also a very timely topic. And I think over the next 2 hours, we will be discussing, hearing about, but also discussing hopefully together a little bit the importance and how integral mental health and psychosocial approaches are to accountability mechanisms. And then if we implement that approach in the right way, that it can lead to a better quality of justice, but also hopefully to more meaningful results, tangible results for victims. So I'm very happy that you're all here and that we can discuss this together. As you probably know, this event is being organized by the Knowledge Platform for Security and the Rule of Law, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is a champion on mental health and psychosocial approaches, and of course also by the author of the report, Anne Michels. And I think a little bit what their aim is with this event is on the one hand to raise awareness about the importance of integrating a mental health and psychosocial approach into accountability processes. Also to create momentum together for increasing and step up this approach. And also very importantly, I think what they want is to create a multidisciplinary community of practice. And if I look at this room and I know who's participating online, then it's quite great to see, that we have a very multidisciplinary audience. We have a lot of legal practitioners who work in the legal institutions. We have officials from governments. We have donors. We have groups that work with victims organizations themselves. We have NGOs, people working on MHPSS approaches themselves. So I think that's already a great step in creating this multidisciplinary community of practice. So before going any further, perhaps 2 practical comments. One is that if you've not done so already, could you please silence your phones? And then the other thing is for those who are joining us online, as you will see, there is a chat function in the Zoom. And we really appreciate if you can share your comments, if you can share your questions, because the idea is that we really make this a joint conversation. We would love to hear from you. And we'll make sure we monitor your contributions and get back to that later during this event. Okay, there is a Q&A system, so that's where you should look for, and that's where you can make your contributions. So perhaps about me, I'm Marlies Stappers. I was asked to moderate this event, and I must say I'm really privileged that I was asked this, because the topic of MHPSS is really close to my heart and to the heart of my organization. I'm the director of Impunity Watch, and Impunity Watch is an international research for policy organization. And what we do is supporting victims, affected communities of serious human rights violations to fight against impunity, but also to achieve justice. But justice defined as victims define it as being useful and meaningful. And so what we've learned in our work is the importance of victim participation. So those of you who know Impunity Watch will know that victim participation is really in our DNA. It's a topic we focus on, but it's also what we do in our approach, working together with victims. And what we've learned is by working together with victims, we make much better approaches. and we make sure that they bring more meaningful results. And then what we've also learned through this work is the importance of this focus of MHPSS. As my colleague would say, you know, that having an MHPSS lens to the work we take, you get like a laser focus on the needs of victims. And the needs of victims will keep us sharp on what is important. But what it also does, I really believe this, that an MHPSS approach, integrating this in our work, shifts the focus a little bit from the output of mechanisms that we so often focus on, and brings us more to the how and to the process. And I think the process and the how is so very important that we take that into account. And in the how, if we work with victims together and take into account their differential needs, that makes for better processes. And that in itself is already often perceived by victims as they get more control over the processes and they get to steer them. So that's why I think this event is so very important. If you would ask me, I think, you know, an MHPSS approach is fundamental in all the work that we do here, but this event focuses on on accountability processes, and I think that's really an important lens to take, especially because of the nature of accountability processes, right? Because the nature of accountability processes is on the perpetrator, it's on proving crimes, you know, beyond a reasonable doubt. And that means that the focus doesn't necessarily start with the victims and on their needs, but on this need to prove. The participation of victims is often determined by the legal processes in itself, so it's quite rigid and doesn't really allow, you know, for victims to participate on terms that are most useful for them. And so what we see in practice often is that it can be traumatizing, re-traumatizing, or that the results are frustrating. And so I think integrating this MHPSS lens will help us to get a little bit more the victim back into the picture, so that we can concentrate more on their needs and that we can see how we balance this approach more. And that's why I think this study is so timely. But we of course all know, and there are good practices where we see victim participation and MHPSS approaches more integrated in accountability mechanisms. I think that's fantastic, but we're not there yet. I mean, it's really the beginning. Much more is needed. And that makes the study of Anne so very important, because it gives us quite a rigorous sort of state of the art of where we stand in the field with respect to integrating such approach. But it also gives us some practical and actionable recommendations on how, if we integrate this, we can really make justice be of more quality and hopefully delivering more meaningful results for victims themselves. So I'm very happy that we're having this event. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I need to say that I'm very, very grateful to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They have been really a champion on MHPSS. I think they've been one of the first to really put this on the agenda. They have been strong on it. That's why they're supporting also this event. And so I'm very happy that we have Nathalie Olieslager here. She's the director of the Department of Stabilization and Humanitarian Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's also the Special Ambassador on MHPSS approaches. So she will give us some opening remarks, and I would like to call her here and take the floor. Thank you very much.
After such a wonderful speech with so much truth, it's kind of hard to step into your shoes, but thank you very much. Great to see you here, everybody. Great for all the people online. I hope you can hear us well and see us well. Hello, people online. They have to listen, right? So you have to really interact also with the ones online. For me, it's truly, truly an honor to be here. And that's actually because of all the words you've already spoken, because you've said so well why it is so important. But let me just reiterate a few things. For us as the Netherlands, accountability and mental health and psychosocial support are two key elements. But they were a little bit separate from each other. So you had the accountability. The Hague, I think, testifies to the importance that we attach to accountability, the Hague as its part that it plays in the UN system. mental health and psychosocial support, it seemed that we only started to put that on the agenda over the last couple of years. But actually, after the Second World War, in the University of Amsterdam, there was this scholar, this professor, who realized that there's so much trauma due to war and conflict and due to atrocities that is not addressed well, not properly addressed, and you carry that with you. You said something about that as well. So I think now that we understand better the linkages between accountability on the one hand and mental health and psychosocial support, and it makes sense that we as the Netherlands want to put that together. So, as I said, these two elements actually really reinforce each other. We really think also that if you want effective accountability, you need that because of the healing of the wounds. But you also need to structurally integrate quality MHPSS, because only then you contribute to humane and effective evidence gathering and to robust testimonies. And I was always thinking about a story that was told to me when I served in Geneva. This was a story about a woman that had left, a Rohingya woman that had left. She was pushed out and just indescribably abused. But she had to testify a couple of times because there were not enough translators, and she was the one who spoke a language that other NGOs and the UN system could actually, communicate with her. And she had to testify a few times on what happened. And then actually what in the process thereafter for the accountability, her testimonies were compared and then put aside because she had used different words. So she had to relive the atrocities that she suffered for, and then when it was used in the accountability system, it could not be used because of the way it was used against her. So that's always something that then I understood how painful it is, how like double painful it is. So that's what I try to say when I say it's so important to have the right testimonies, because you want accountability, and the more pure the testimony, the better the accountability. On the other side, you really need to help and support the ones that testify to do that in a good manner, because they are going through a huge process of reliving, and if they don't do it well, it can't be used. So it's really, really important to make these two elements part of the game, part of what we do. Sorry, it's not a game. Well, as was said, we've been trying to really advocate hard for it. I really have to thank my colleagues also here in the room, because there are some colleagues, won't name them all, but I think they know who I mean, that are already, that have really pushed hard to keep advocating for it. I think internationally we keep putting it on the agenda. Sometimes you don't need money for everything. You do need money, but it's also very important to keep the momentum that we've created alive. And we're very grateful for all the countries that also see how important it is. So I'm also very grateful for maybe some representatives of some countries here in the audience, because I hope you can help us in keeping MHPSS and accountability on the agenda internationally, and specifically also for accountability mechanisms. Well, we have a number already of inspiring studies and recommendations. Those are already present, and I think that you will show, or not.
I didn't make the slide.
You didn't make the slide. Well, we will show a slide, because already there is a lot of really good material that at least we make use of, and I hope you do too, but we can send it later. It's just to also pay tribute to everybody who's already working in the field, like was said. And also I want to actually call to your attention that next month there will be a presentation of another relevant study by Pablo de Grijf on MHPSS and prevention of violence. Well, for today, the study presented today is of a principled importance. It shows why and how to make MHPSS an integral part of accountability mechanisms for atrocity crimes. Recognition of atrocity crimes for what they are is crucial for many reasons. One of these is to, at least start to, enable victims and witnesses of these crimes to come to terms with what was done to them. Accountability for these crimes is important because no such crimes should go unpunished. For accountability mechanisms and trajectories to be successful, sturdy testimonies are required, as I just also mentioned in the case of the Rohingya lady. And the testimonies are made by those who suffered most. And then the lawyers come and try to put holes into those type of testimonies. So that means that they have to be strong and supported, as I said, because lawyers and sometimes others will try to invalidate it in terrible ways sometimes. And let us reflect on that. Let us try to put ourselves in the shoes of a witness that has to relive what he or she went through and need to test. So if we want to really be as humane and as professional as possible, we need a very good sustained psychological accompaniment of the way we treat the people who testify. And that, I guess, leads us to today, brings us here together, because Anne Michels, as a psychologist at the International Criminal Court, has been really looked in this. Well, you already have your experience and you've done a lot of interviews. I think you had a sabbatical, if I understood it correctly, so you also had some time, but it probably took a lot. It took a lot of time, and you are going to present your findings with us, with the support from also our partner was already mentioned, the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law. So also kudos to them. Just want to say something briefly on the study, because I think for us, there were 3 elements that we think are really important to mention from the policy side. So we have now an inventory and analysis of emerging evidence of the way in which MHPSS, as integral part of accountability mechanisms, contributes to their effectiveness, to the quality of evidence gathering, to the secure basis that potential witnesses need to perceive in order to even consider testifying, to the resilience, perseverance, and psychological well-being of the professionals working in these mechanisms themselves. So for us, we're going to pay really good attention to what you did. We are already doing that, but we want to keep doing that, of course, and we want to really also work with your recommendations. Don't want to say more because I think we're all eager to hear what you have to say, also eager to hear what the panel will say. So I would like to introduce you to the floor, and thank you all again for being here and paying good attention. And let's stay together in this acknowledgement, and I was almost going to call it a fight, but maybe it's not a fight, but really to keep MHPSS and the importance on the agenda everywhere, because as human beings, we don't exist of our bodies alone. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nathalie, for this very beautiful introduction. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon and good morning to some people who are following online from overseas. And yeah, this is quite a special moment for me, as you can imagine, to see a full room. And I know I don't even want to think about the number of people who are following this online, because it has been quite a journey for me, from the idea to write up good practices. This is how it started. This idea would never have become this comprehensive study as it is now without the support, involvement and enthusiasm of many people. So before I dive into the study, I do want to take a little bit of your time to thank a few people. First of all, I would like to thank the Knowledge Platform for Security and the Rule of Law, who gave me the Knowledge Management Fund Innovation Grant. And especially, I don't see her, but Messina Messina Manirakiza has been particularly supportive throughout the process, and also Evelyn Steens here at the end, who was very helpful. I also want to thank again the Foreign Ministry of the Netherlands, and specifically Renette van der Waals, who's a force of nature when it comes to fighting for MHPSS, because I do think we need to fight for it. And also Nathalie Olieslagers, thank you so much for being here. And I must say I've been very impressed with the efforts of the Netherlands to put MHPSS on the forefront, and to indeed so beautifully combining the efforts for accountability with the efforts to fight for MHPSS, which is exactly what I'm also doing in my work. I also want to thank the ICC and particularly the registrar and the colleagues from the Victims and Witnesses section. I know some of them are here today, for giving me the space and also the trust to write this, which is not always a given. And of course, I want to thank my co-authors, Evelien de Bruin, who is here. She was extremely helpful in the beginning of the study, giving this a direct and doing so much more, including organizing with me the first expert meeting, etc. There is a team from the Human Rights in Trauma Mental Health program from Stanford University, and I know they're watching from San Francisco, Darren Reicheter, Lisa Brown, and Panthea Javidan. And their critical academic eye certainly made this publication of a better quality. So I'm very grateful that they put their support and their manpower behind this to help me. And then there are the more than 60 people which I was able to speak to. So I must say there was not so much time left in my sabbatical eventually. I was able to consult more than 60 people for this study: prosecutors, investigators, magistrates, psychosocial experts, and practitioners who work inside and outside accountability mechanisms. Also people from international organizations, NGO, academics, and victims, of course, who all generously made time to talk to me and share their experiences. I also want to thank Marlies for moderating this event, and for the panelists who we will meet later, Ahmed, Anna, and Megan, for sharing their experiences. I'm very much looking forward to what they have to say. Finally, I want to thank my friends and family. Some of them are here, who supported me throughout and who are also very patient, because that was necessary at times. So why this study? And I forget that I have a PowerPoint, in fact. So why this study, and why did I decide to focus on accountability mechanisms for atrocity crimes? Well, atrocity crimes are the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole, we know that. And war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide are crimes which leave deep scars in the life of victims, their children, their grandchildren, and even the children of their children, the next generations. But it also leaves scars on societies. And so the question how to address this is absolutely relevant. And accountability mechanisms for these crimes can include investigations and trials at international and national level, including universal jurisdiction cases, but also processes to formally document atrocities in the context of the work by investigating mechanisms, commissions of inquiry, or fact-finding missions, and other processes collecting detailed victims and witness statements. So not only trials need statements from witnesses, but also other accountability mechanisms do that. And also more recently developed more innovative approaches which combine restorative and retributive justice, like the example in Colombia, have been taken in consideration for this study. The thing is, judicial processes, as we know, are per definition formal and bound to respect critical legal principles, such as due process and the rights of the accused. And the legal process determines the modality of participation of victims and not the other way around, as may be the case in more restorative, informal, or non-judicial processes. As such, the process results in several limitations for victims and witnesses for their freedom to participate in the way they may wish to. And at the same time, a lot can be gained from integrating a mental health and psychosocial support approach into these processes. And at the ICC, we see on a daily basis what it means for victims and witnesses, what the sacrifices they make to come forward and take the risk to testify and be part of this process. But at the same time, because of a very strong legal framework, which brings the Rome Statute, we're able at the ICC to, both in the registry, also in the Office of the Prosecutor, to develop a number of good practices around supporting victims and witnesses, but also integrating it in the whole process to offer them psychological protection and support. So in recent years, we received an increasing number of requests for training, presentations, advice from different organizations, but also from national systems. And it's made me think like, okay, let me just all write this up and look for the good practices that exist, because there are many good practices that were developed. So this is what motivated to write me the study. However, what motivated me even more was the fact that since the beginning of my work in this field, which is many years ago by now, I have been puzzled by the fact of what I call the testimony paradox, the fact that accountability mechanisms rely very heavily on witness and victim testimony. This is still the most important form of evidence that is brought to the court. At the same time, the process depends on people who are already very much burdened because of the fact that they were exposed to these violations, which makes witnesses the link in this process. And victimization and the often consequent severe trauma can make victims and witnesses really vulnerable, which may affect their willingness and capacity to participate and increase the risk that the process harms them psychologically. So there is a discrepancy between the weight that is put on their shoulders and the rigid nature of the court process. But I'm very strongly convinced that providing psychosocial support and applying a broader MHPSS approach can help to overcome this paradox. Providing psychosocial support and adapting processes, especially also that, will not eliminate all risks to witnesses and victims, but it will make the process better and can even improve their well-being. So I want to give you a very short glance of the study. You can have a copy there, just enough to make you curious to read the whole study. I would also, like to emphasize that we have an online version, which is even better than the printed version, because there are nice hyperlinks and there is a nice navigation tool, and there are hyperlinks to resource material, etc. So basically what we do, and I really want to lift out just a few points, we have two parts in the study, and the first part is where we analyze how MHPSS approaches can improve accountability mechanisms and strengthen access to justice for victims. And we broke that down in 4 different goals of MHPSS. For each of these goals, we looked at the research that is done, and we kind of brought in also the experiences. And there is no time to go through all of them, but I just want to lift out one element that I want to bring a bit closer, is the fact that we know, and this was mentioned earlier already, that I will go there to that slide, that the integration of MHPSS approaches can improve well-being and contribute to healing. It's a bit of a contradiction, because we know from earlier studies that victims and witnesses their experiences were not very positive after having testified in tribunals or even in truth commissions. We know that victims and witnesses often felt worse after their testimony. So you wonder, why do they want to do this? That's also an experience I had myself, and I was working in Rwanda with victims, that I think, why do they want to do this knowing that it's worse for them? And basically, the answer to that lies in the fact that we need to look at well-being as in relation to a sense of coherence. Research shows that people who have a strong capacity to make sense of the world, to find meaning, to see predictability, to have a sense of belonging, and especially a sense of agency, that their well-being is higher. So, and this can explain why witnesses and victims want to do this, because testifying, even it makes them feel worse, because just we know from studies that just revealing is not healing. Just expression of emotion doesn't bring any relief. But the fact that they take control and they want to do this for themselves, this is what gives them the power to do it. And so if we in accountability processes are able to stimulate or to enhance this sense of coherence by the way we interview people, by the way we adapt our processes, by the way we give support, etc., which is an MHPSS approach, this is how we bring healing. This is how we don't bring healing, but this is how we can facilitate healing for victims and witnesses. And I think that's a very important element to keep in mind, that it's more about the agency rather than the expression of emotion. Just 1 second, I would like to go to the next, the rest of the study and the recommendations. There's a long list of recommendations, very detailed. What we plead for in the study, and that's also why I'm so happy we have this evening tonight where also representatives from governments are present, is that there is absolutely need for a structural integration of MHPSS. It's not enough to just say, let's hire psychologists and let them give support. You need to integrate it in the whole way you set up your trials. You need to strengthen the role of psychosocial experts, and they need to also be included in leadership teams. Otherwise, it doesn't work, as we know from experience. You also need to address vicarious trauma, the situation of staff. And then there are recommendations for each of the phases of the testimony timeline. I will not go there, but you will see them. For me, this is not the end of a process. I very, very much hope that this is the beginning, and that we're able as a community, and then again, I look at representatives of states, but also representatives of accountability mechanisms, to put this project further. And I gave it a name, the Antigone Project. You will read in the study why it's called Antigone. And we hope that we can build a community of practice, that we can work further on the consolidation of guidelines and move towards standards, that it becomes the standard for accountability mechanisms to include an MHPSS support approach rather, that it's not seen as a nice to have, but as an essential part. I leave it at that. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Anne, for your presentation of your study. I think it was so good to hear what you have to say. And I also want to say here that I'm so impressed by your motivation of why you did the study to begin with, right? I mean, if we lose out the human connection, the humanity of why we do this, then, you know, it becomes very legal and formal, and that's not how we're going to make change in the lives of victims. So that your motivation comes from your experience, from the enormous respect that you gain from victims, from their courage, from their inspiration. I think that is really something that to acknowledge here, and also that you saw the gap within the accountability mechanisms. So thanks very much for that. And I love your accent on the agency of the victims, and I hope we'll explore that a little bit more here. So what we're going to do now is we move to a panel discussion, because we've heard the theory of Anne and what she's researched and what she heard from experts, her own experience. But I think it's important that we contrast that a little bit with the practice on the ground, and you know what the experience is of people working within these mechanisms with MHPSS approaches, both from the legal experts, but of course also from the victims who are going through this. So I think we have a great panel here to go through these questions, and I'll very briefly introduce them. I strongly recommend, I understand that there is bio circulating, so please look them up so that we don't lose too much time here. I'll start, because there's always a discrimination to those who are physically here, so I'll start with Ahmad Helmi, who's sitting next to me. Ahmad Helmi is from Syria. He is a survivor. He's someone I deeply, deeply respect. He is a man with such courage and such clarity, and I think I have learned a lot from him, and I think his contribution to the fight against impunity for justice and human rights is amazing. Due to his activism, he was imprisoned for 3 years, and during this time of imprisonment, he suffered torture. But this didn't lead him to abandon the fight for justice. On the contrary, after that, he created an initiative called Ta'afi. It's an initiative that supports people who were illegally detained, who suffered torture, to pick up their lives again and to fight for justice. He also is a founding member of an initiative called the Truth and Justice Charter that is currently fighting and has played a pivotal role, an impressive role, in the establishment of an international institution to establish the whereabouts, the fate and the whereabouts about the missing in Syria, an initiative that is now currently being created. And he also is a founding member of Innovas, which is an international network of victims of serious human rights violations that try to make their voice heard on the international level. So I would say that is quite an impressive experience. So we have Ahmad, then we have 2 participants online. We have Megan Hurst. I think people in the legal community probably know Megan. I was going through her CV and I was really quite impressed. She is Australian. She's currently working as a barrister out of London, if I'm not mistaken. And she has over 15 years of experience working on issues related to victim participation on different sides. So she started off working on the institution, on the victim participation sections of the ICC and of the International Tribunal for Lebanon. Then she moved into private practice and is representing victims in proceedings in the extraordinary chambers of the courts of Cambodia, but also at the ICC. And in the stand, she works, for example, very closely together with a group of victims from the Rohingya. So that's a very impressive experience. And I'm just mentioning a couple of points. And then we have Anna Sosonska. Well, she brings to us the experience of Ukraine. I think we can all understand what it means to work on criminal prosecution in a context of ongoing war. She is a war crime prosecutor in the Ukraine's office of the Prosecutor General. And she's now also acting head of the conflict-related sexual violence unit. And what she also does is organize investigative missions to liberated areas. And so I can only understand what that means, you know, to be doing that work. And I'm really grateful that we have this experience here. And as I said, it will land us a little bit, you know, in the practice that is often messy, that is complex, and where no easy, clear-cut solutions are found. So with that introduction, I thought we'd do 2 rounds of questions. And I thought we start, Megan, if that's all right with you, to have more of a bird's eye perspective, since Megan has worked in different contexts, on different contexts, and within and outside of the institutions. So Megan, I can imagine that in your work you have seen quite a lot, and we've already heard a little bit from Anne about the hurdles and the obstacles within accountability processes for victims to participate meaningfully throughout the process. So I would be very curious to hear from you, from your experience. How do you see the importance of integrating an MHPSS approach? What sort of problems do you think it can resolve? And what do you hear from victims in that regard? And on that experience, having heard and read the study of Anne, are there any contributions, ideas that you would like to raise that are really helpful for your work also moving forward?
Thank you, Marlies, and thank you, Anne, for inviting me to be a part of this. It's an honour and a little intimidating to share the panel with Anna and Ahmed, given the work they're doing. I should say first that, you know, when we talk about MHPSS, I think there's a tendency to think a lot about those who testify in the courts. And I think as a victims lawyer, it would be remiss if I didn't say that actually the court touches so many thousands of other individuals in its work beyond those who testify. You know, those who the prosecution meets who don't end up being witnesses, and those who participate as victims being among them. I think we're getting better at talking about these issues and MHPSS, but I think unfortunately there's a tendency to focus a lot on the first step maybe of the process, what we might consider as the kind of do no harm stage. You know, we talk a lot about doing no harm. We recognize now that we're dealing with traumatized or people who've been through a traumatic event and therefore very likely to be traumatized regardless of how they might present to us when we meet them. So we're conscious of that. But I think this carries in itself some risks. One risk is that we can tend to treat victims as sort of fragile people who need to be paternalized. And secondly, there's a risk that we think, you know, when we talk about being trauma-informed, that we stop at this do no harm level and we don't go further. And I think it's really important that we do go further, and that actually just as important as doing no harm, you know, doing no harm is the bare minimum. Of course, we should try when we do our work that we don't create new problems for people, but I think we can aim higher than this. And I think that really we should, as Anne said, I think about how we can improve wellbeing. How can we incorporate an MHPSS approach so that we are actually making a positive impact on people, not only not harming them? How do we do that? We've already heard, I think from Anne mentioned a lot the word agency, and Marlies spoke about focusing on process rather than outcome. And this is really what I would say is central. You know, for me, it's very hard for us to achieve the outcomes that our clients want. My Rohingya clients, of course, they want to go back to Myanmar. They want to go back to Myanmar with full citizenship. They want to see people convicted for the crimes they suffered. They want to have restitution of their property. I can't necessarily hope that I will bring them those things in the short term. We'll keep fighting for them, of course, but I think we want to believe that even during the long period when we haven't achieved those things, that we can offer something else. And that's why I think process is so central. We need to think about how the process can benefit people. And when I think about how the process benefits people, what Anne said about agency is really central to my thinking. And I learned this from Anne previously, from working with her in the past. I heard her speaking on a panel once before where she spoke about the impact of trauma and how it causes people to feel a loss of control. And this is, I think, the thing we're trying to rectify. And I think as lawyers, this is what we do in all our work. And if any of you has ever had the need to hire a lawyer for yourselves in an employment dispute or a family law dispute, you might also recognize this yourself, that what you get from a lawyer is some reassurance that you have someone helping you understand the situation, knowing what might be coming, and also going into bat for you and fight your corner. You know, so that's what we try and do for the victims. We try and empower them. We try and give them agency. So how can we do that more effectively? Because I think it's very easy to say this is what we want to do, but in practice, as Marlies said, it's super messy. It's difficult. I think, you know, what I would ultimately hope for, obviously, is that these people would all also have direct professional support. And I don't pretend that giving legal representation can stand in for that. But what we could do better for our legal representation work, I think maybe three things that I would hope for. One, and links in again with what Anne said, is more mental health expertise built into our institutions. You know, what I've just said is really that I believe that lawyering for victims, representing victims, victim participation is actually not only a legal thing, but a psychological process as well. But I'm not a psychologist, and the people I work with are not psychologists, you know, and just as when I have an IT problem, the court helps me with that by giving me technical assistance on that, I would like that when I have things that I need to know about the very important aspects of my work, which require psychological expertise, that I have people to assist me with that. My ultimate dream would be that I have a part-time psychologist kind of within my legal team. But I think in the meanwhile, having more people within the court, you know, not only having the Office of Public Counsel for Victims who can support me with legal advice, but someone who can help me understand how I should be doing things from a psychological perspective would make a huge difference. In the meanwhile, guidance documents that are designed for the specific work we do. And I think this is where Anne's study is really useful and important, because Anne knows exactly the work that we do at the court, which is so specialized and sometimes quite opaque. And sometimes we come across situations in our work where we just don't know. And in the absence of somebody who can advise us directly, I think the guidance documents are priceless. And thirdly, we need to change the culture of our institutions. You know, I think that the difficulty is that there are still many people in our institutions who are very focused only on outcomes. And there are many people who can tend to see outcomes and processes as being in competition with each other. Or to put it another way, I come across people who I think seem to feel that empowering the victims will somehow undermine the outcomes that they want, that empowering victims would actually reduce the prospects of a conviction, for example, in the case of prosecution colleagues. And so I think this is the changing culture that we need to work on, that we need to, I think, as Natalie mentioned, encourage the idea that actually MHPSS approaches improve not only the experience of the participants in the proceedings, but actually strengthen the justice process overall. And I think these three things that I've mentioned should be mutually reinforcing. And I think Anne's work is a really important contribution to them.
Thanks, Megan. I thought it was an excellent response. And I love the part where you say, you know, that we need to change the institutional culture, because I think there's indeed some beliefs that really hold us back, and I think they can be challenged. And I think that's really important. And I love, you know, that you also focus on the process, because indeed, you know, we know that a judicial process can lead to a conviction. It can also lead to an acquittal. And then what happens with the victims afterwards? Or you have a conviction, but then that might be overruled later on. And then what happens with the victims and their needs? And I'm very happy to see Anna nodding very hard when we talk about institutional, changing the culture. Anna, I'm so happy you're here, and I'm just so impressed with the work you're doing. I think you have the respect of all of us here. I cannot believe how it must be, you know, to work on these cases in an ongoing conflict, and how raw, you know, the testimonies must also be of the victims you work with. When I was reading a little bit about you and preparing for this panel, I saw that the prosecutor office adopted an MHPSS approach already in its work, and it was for me fascinating to hear. So I would love to hear from you why you took that decision, where did it come from, and also what it looks like, and what you see a bit as the challenges, but also the benefits. And finally, I have another question which relates to what we were discussing, right? The victim's needs. Is the MHPSS lens also part of your prosecutorial strategy, so that it influences a little bit on how you go about establishing your cases?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this amazing question. And distinguished guest, I'm very happy, and there is extraordinary privilege for me to be with you today to discuss such an important topic, and even online participating from Kyiv, you know. Yes, as was mentioned, after beginning of the occupation of some territories in Ukraine in March 2022, we discovered a lot of facts of sexual violence committed by Russian representatives, by Russian military personnel, and it was committed against civilian population and prisoners of war. And as a result, Prosecutor General Office here in Ukraine faced a difficult task of documenting the facts of conflict-related sexual violence in such a way as to maintain a balance between achieving a goal of justice on one hand, because here, of course, we are a law enforcement agency, we are war crime prosecutors prosecuting war crime, and adequately informing the public about the atrocities of Russians, while avoiding also re-traumatization of victims and their family members, which is also was our core issue. And all these challenges were brand new for Ukrainian law enforcement system. And we realized that we had to learn from the best practices of our international colleagues. those who have been working with war crimes, as Anne mentioned previously, crimes against humanity, and that was also our main issue, who had been working with survivors of these atrocities for a long time. And that is why in January 2023, Mr. Prosecutor General requested to the Director of the Division of External Operation in the International Criminal Court and asked him about conducting specialized training on protection and support for victims of CRS3. And we pointed out in our request that the audience of this training would include not only war crime prosecutors and investigators from different law enforcement agencies, the Security Service of Ukraine, which is now like military structure, National Police of Ukraine, but also psychologists and specialists who used to work in the direction of supporting victims of CRS3. And actually, there was the way how we met Anne and her team from Victim and Witnesses section, and they arrived to Kyiv in March 2023 to implement our training request. And that training, that was the first training conducted for the needs of Prosecutor General Office of Ukraine, and it was focused on applying an integrated witness and victim-centered model for protection and support for victims on conflict-related sexual violence and in Ukraine. Then at the training, Anne and her team emphasized the need to adopt a special policy to introduce a mechanism of victim-centered approach at the official level in our investigation. And it has passed some time, and in order to strengthen our accountability on the field of prosecution CRC crime, Prosecutor General Office has developed a special strategic plan for implementation of the powers of the Prosecutor Office in the field of criminal prosecution for sexual violence related to the conflict. It was approved by the Prosecutor General on June 26, 2023. And in accordance with this strategic plan, new approaches of protecting the interests of victims and witnesses and their family members have been implemented, like adaptation to the personality of victims, prioritizing the safety of the victims, also ensuring inclusiveness and non-discrimination, ensuring the possibility for victims to maintain control of over their information and in any form, and also prohibition of stigmatization, prohibition of transmission and publication of any information about victims that could lead to actions that accuse, humiliate, condemn, ridicule, or disrespect victims somehow. Also, with the support of the UN's team of experts from the Office of the CRSG Pattern, a specialized division of Prosecutor General Office has the possibility to engage as specialized psychologists, because previously Megan mentioned about it was her dream to have a special psychologist in her team. So it was my dream too. And that is why I have this psychologist. She also is a special, she's a specialist and provides a special report in our criminal proceedings. The task of the specialist is also to work with victims in the case that CRSV division operate with. And what is remarkable, our partners from the UN team of experts also always involves Anne as a trainer to conduct specialized training for Ukrainian prosecutors, investigators, and judges as well. And right now, their training for us is going on in Poland. And Anne, I know Anne mentioned about that. Anne just got back from Poland, and I'm infinitely grateful to her for her expertise and willingness to always to support us. And these practices correspond to the principal recommendation about structural integration of MHPSS approaches in accountability mechanism and role of psychological experts that are reflected in Anne's study, such as integrate victim and witness-centered and trauma-informed approaches throughout all processes, policies, and operational procedures, ensure provision of culturally appropriate support support with protect the dignity and privacy of victims and witnesses and facilitate their involvement in the process, strengthen multidisciplinary and multisectoral collaboration within national justice processes, provide ongoing training on interacting with victims and witnesses to relevant staff, integrate MHPSS approaches in the design of the prosecutorial strategy for each case to include the short and long-term psychological harm suffered by victims and their communities resulting from atrocity crimes. And currently, all these approaches also are used by the Prosecutor General Office, and we also implemented the same approaches into 2 pilot regions with the most large amount of CRSV cases. That is Kharkiv region and Kherson region. And also I have to mention that with the support of the international expert Ingrid Elliott, we also are in the process of implementing special operation procedures for prosecution CRSV crimes, which also will include the special micro-learning process about how to collaborate with victim witnesses and their family members on victim-oriented way, and also about how to avoid vicarious traumatization. So thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Anna. That was a very comprehensive presentation, and it's astonishing to hear, you know, how really structurally integrated this approach is in the work you're doing. And what I take a little bit from what you say is, you know, that this approach comes from, you know, it's need-based. It was really, you were confronted with the situation, not experienced before, need-based made you develop this. And then what is really nice to hear is this collaboration, right, with the international community and how by working together we can really make this work. And what I also like, I mean, obviously when we look at how cases are constructed normally in legal institutions, in criminal institutions, the focus is very much on what can we prove. And what you are saying is, you know, that you saw basically 2 needs. Obviously the need to prove that the crimes, but also to educate the general public on atrocities that are committed. And why gives more space also for victims to participate. So I think this is a compelling story and also showing us that it is possible, right, to implement such an approach. And thank you very much for that, and it's impressive. So now I think it's important we move to the victim's perspective. So Ahmad, I'm moving to you. As I already said, you know, you went through a horrific experience yourself. I still cannot believe how it is possible you sit here, that you didn't abandon your fight for justice, and that you're such an example to so many people in continuing that fight. We've heard, you know, from the legal perspective, how people look at MHPSS. I think it's only fair that we ask you, how do you look at an MHPSS approach? What in your view, you know, should it entail? What makes it important, and what can institutions, criminal institutions, accountability mechanisms learn from your experience?
Thank you, Marlies. I mean, for the first time, I would prefer to be on Zoom, not to see this scene. We have almost more than 60 people here, I count you. It made me less nervous. Because on Zoom I would hide my hands and they won't be shaking. And I would smoke a lot, which is not allowed here. Yeah, apparently. How many here in the room have a phone, by raise of hand? A phone. Okay, everyone? Okay. How many of you do remember one phone number beside your own? Oh, come on. Okay, I lost my argument. This is a very smart audience. I have to start again. But anyway, in 2011, during the beginning of the Syrian revolution, my best friend, his name was Islam, he was kidnapped or enforcibly disappeared by the Syrian government, by the Syrian intelligence forces. And he was not as smart as you are. He only memorized my phone number. because I was his best friend. He didn't even memorize his home phone number, his mother's or his father's phone number. And for 2 years, I kept my phone loud, charged, paid for, waiting for the moment where he will be released to call me. By the end of 2012, I was entering the door of Damascus University, and I was arrested by also the Syrian government for my nonviolence activism. The first and the only thing that came to my mind when they were taking me was two things. Was to look at the sky, because me and Islam used to go out every night and just wander in the sky, and to say goodbye to the sky. And the second thing was who Islam will call when he is out. 5 months passed. I was tortured, and I was in some unpleasant events. And the only thing that was going on in my head was, if Islam is out, who he will call. After 5 months, my mom, the Iron Mother, she managed to get me out of the dungeons for disappearance into a formal detention facility. And she came to visit me the second day. The first thing I did is to give her my phone and ask her to keep paying the bill, keep it on charge, and keep waiting for Islam to call. I was released after 3 years of prison, and up until today, this call didn't happen. For me, I'm okay with torture. I'm not encouraging torture, but I'm fine with forgiving those who tortured me, but I'm not fine forgiving those who kidnapped Islam. And you asked about my driver. Actually, that is exactly my driver. I went through 2 years of therapy and torture a lot. I talk about torture in public, also with my therapist. And because I knew why I was tortured, I knew I was fighting for justice, and I continue fighting for justice. And I talk about it. I talk about my whole experience. There is only one thing that I don't talk about, and I didn't talk about with my therapist. It was my whole experience with my best friend, Islam. Because I was afraid that my therapist will treat my anxiety and my fear and my feelings of missing my best friend, which will take away my driver. And up until today, I didn't talk with him about it. And we have, I work with, as Marlies said, I work with an organization that provides support for victims and survivors of torture and for disappearance, and we provide psychosocial support for victims. For the first 2 years of our work, we always offered MHPSS for victims, and we used to say, this will help you overcome, this will help you forgive and forget and let go. And surprisingly, for 2 years, none of the 150 survivors we worked with agreed to take any kind of support. So I went through therapy, and we found that if we just change the terms and the narrative of what we are saying, that will change the whole story. We started saying, we can offer you MHPSS to empower your fight for justice, to give you the agency to continue fighting as long as you want and as long as you can't. Surprisingly, the whole 150 survivors asked for MHPSS. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources, which also speak to what you said in the report. So if you look at that scene, you see how we, as Megan said, we need that change in the culture of the institution. We need to see victims and MHPSS not as broken. We need to fix them with MHPSS because that will give us a negative look at MHPSS. We need to see victims as agents, as powerful actors, and we need to empower them and to give them the agency to continue fighting. Because let's be honest, without victims, there's no crimes. And there is also, of course, no fight for justice, and there is no justice. Megan mentioned that if you have a lawyer for a family dispute, if you say that I want half of the money and half of the children with my divorce, he can tell you, okay, let's keep the money and just take the children. It's your agency, right? It's what you want. And that's what should happen also in the justice processes. And this is exactly why MHPSS should be fully integrated in justice processes. And I'm saying justice intentionally, not only accountability. I know the great report emphasized on MHPSS in accountability processes, but that also should apply in every aspect of justice processes and transitional justice processes, because I'm also emphasizing that justice is not accountability. Criminal accountability is a part of justice. It does not, it's not the only component, it's not everything. And yeah, so this is one of the shortcomings of the traditional justice approaches. It sees victims, and it sees MHPSS as weak, as broken, and we want to not harm them again. You said in the report, it's about centralizing victims. And how can you centralize victims? You want to provide the support, the MHPSS, in empowering way, in giving them the agency. And when you give them the agency, it's the essential actor rather than the weakest link in the scene. Yeah. So. You have 1 minute. 1 minute? Okay. Yeah. So also you mentioned in the report that awareness should not, and that kind of a new approach and a new lens of approaching MHPSS is not only for victims, it's not only for the separated discipline of MHPSS. It should be structural, it should be integrated into the system. Also, those who work directly, closely or remotely with victims should be aware of this approach and of this awareness, because they also play an essential role in interlinking the system together. Coming back to the point when I couldn't talk about my story with my friend, because I needed that driver. So MHPSS, as also greatly emphasized in the report, should approach victims and families in that way. You will keep your driver. We are not taking away your driver. We're not taking away your agency, because we all know that victims, they don't want to let go. They don't want to be relieved. They want justice. And that justice is the most important component. When they get justice and during, MHPSS can accompany them. And from our work, as you mentioned, we are a group of 10 Syrian families and victims associations. We managed to get a breakthrough through the UN. Those who knows the UN, it's the most bureaucratic organization in the world. It's lower than the sun in the Netherlands. And we managed to get a breakthrough in the UN in 3 years to establish a new institution only by the power of victims and the support of the international organization. So don't undermine that driver, don't undermine that agency, because it can make the change we want to make. Thank you.
Well, we could basically now stop this further debate. I think everything has been said. Thank you, Ahmad. I thought you said such important points, right? I think, how do we look at victims? Often, we take such an existentialistic look. We treat them with as if they're vulnerable, as we hear a lot of times. And what Ahmad is saying, we might have gone through very horrific experiences, but we have agency, and that needs to be recognized. So an MHPSS process is about that agency, is about empowerment, and not taking away the driver. And I think that's a very, very important point for us to recollect. And then what I hear repeating by everyone is this change in culture, right? So that the culture within the institutions understands this, or can be more accommodating in that. And that also often, we make promises also on MHPSS, but then we don't live up with the finances. So how can, that we promise something and then there's not the resources for it? So that doesn't sound like a very responsible nor a very good MHPSS approach. And finally, and I know this is not a topic here, but what you're saying is, the transitional justice field is so divided in mechanisms that comes again with a very narrow output. And for victims, justice is much more. It needs a comprehensive approach. It doesn't end with a sentence. And so if we really take this MHPSS approach, we will find that there is other needs that also need to be accommodated, and that we need to put the victims in the driver's seat to try to establish that. So after justice come other approaches as well. So I'm not a very good timekeeper, but we have 20 minutes left, and I also want to give space to the audience to speak. I think we started a bit late, so maybe we can take 5 more minutes. But okay, but do we still have time to a very quick? Evelyn, who's very, very strict with me. Yes, a little bit. Okay, we have a little bit of time. So, panelists, I'm going to ask the impossible. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll ask you to please be brief in a minute to give a couple of ideas, so just to energize a good discussion afterwards. And Megan, I know you always set great examples, so I start with you. And what I wanted to ask you, Megan, is this is also something that Anne mentioned in her study, right? I mean, we speak now a lot about the victims, but we haven't really spoken about what it means for supporters of victims in the legal community to work with victims. This, I think, has long been taboo because we're dealing with such huge crimes that have been taken place. But of course, if you support, if you represent victims, this also leads to trauma, but it has long been taboo. So I would love to hear from you, what is your experience with MHPSS support for legal professionals? Have you seen good examples? And how could this be supported better so that also the community is able to step up to its task?
It's a really important question, and it's difficult to talk about this, I think, after hearing what Ahmed has just said. But on some level, I think it actually also helps me explain to people the difficulties that I think we face in dealing with it, because you meet these people and you work with these people and want to help them who have been through truly unthinkable things. And to reflect for a moment on your own difficulties, it can really create a feeling of kind of guilt and shame, I think, that you don't want to imagine that you have any struggles, because actually you're also constantly reminded of how fortunate you've been in your life when every time you meet your clients. So I think it is difficult for us to acknowledge, and I think, you know, for some serious reasons, but I think we talk about it more than we used to. It's definitely discussed more. One thing that I think we need to acknowledge more is that this burden doesn't fall on all of us equally. I'm not on the front line, you know. I meet my clients maybe once a year when I can go in person, because I'm struggling with funding. But you know, those field officers who are there on the front line every day, every week, working with the victims for the court, and keeping in mind that they are often people from the conflict region who themselves may have been through traumatic events, I think they bear a much heavier burden. So it's easy for me, I think, from a distance to say that we're dealing with it. But actually, I think even though we talk about it, in the 20 or so years that I've been working on these kinds of issues, I haven't seen a huge increase in the resourcing and the creation of structures. And I think that's true of MHPSS throughout. So I think it's just a reflection of the broader issue. And I think, you know, one other thing that I would say, you know, obviously we can think about all the things we should do about this, which are important: training, helping us as professionals understand how to identify warning signs, how to mitigate risks. Those things are important. For me, though, I have to say, and recognizing again that I'm not so much on the front line, the thing that causes me, that I feel in my work, which causes a burden for me, is this feeling of impotence and not being able to achieve results for my clients. I actually myself, and maybe it's because I'm not meeting them as often as I would like, hearing the traumatic experiences itself is not the thing which causes me distress. What causes me distress a lot is the feeling that I'm not able to do something about that in response. And that is something I think which is a real struggle for us. And, you know, so again, it brings me back to how do we deal with this better, actually make the systems better for the victims, I think is really an important thing. And I don't want to take up much time, but I really wanted just to say, while I do have the floor, thank you to those who organised this and the Dutch government for spending money on this issue. And those of you who are in the room, I was talking about culture change before. I mean, I think the people who came to this event who are online watching are probably the people who already think in this way, that you've come to an event about this. So I think we all need to be a part then of helping spread that thinking with the others who we work with.
Thanks, Megan. And I wish that a minute would last as long as you've just spoken. But it's interesting, you know, when you speak, that you automatically to belittle a little bit your own distress, saying, yeah, it's more difficult for others. And I think you're also entitled to speak, you know, about this burden. And I can understand that in the face of so much need, that this is really difficult to handle. And this is why solidarity and being a community is also so important, right? And that we do pay attention to this if we want to do our work well. So thanks for that. Anna, I'm moving to you, and I hope your minute is a little bit more a minute than Megan's minute. You already answered this a little bit, but still, you know, especially in your work in the Ukraine, when there's so many needs in the victims' communities you work with, could you say something about how you deal with other needs that victims come up with? And also what happens after a trial? I understand that in Ukraine, many of the trials are, of course, in absentia. I don't know what this means for victims. So what's sort of the follow-up that happens afterwards? How do you take care of victims and their diverse needs following from a court case?
Thank you for this question. As I mentioned before, our collaboration with the victims started from our guarantee to save them and to provide them security measures, protective measures. And also here in the structure of the Prosecutor General last summer also was set up a special division. The title is Coordination Center for Support of Victims and Witnesses. And they're not the prosecutors. They don't do this, you know, public prosecution, uphold state prosecution in the court. They're just civil servants. And their task is actually what you asked me, to support victims and witnesses during all stages of litigation, during all stages of criminal proceeding, pre-trial investigation, trial, and after judgment. But of course, because of ongoing aggression, I have to say that we have very limited efforts and very limited resources to support all of them, because there is thousands of those who suffered not only from conflict-related sexual violence, but other type of war crimes. And that is why our also court decision was to collaborate with non-government organizations who support victims and witnesses, especially those of them who work on occupied territories. So that is why I had a field mission, and also I collaborated with non-government organizations as well.
Thank you, Anna. That is, I love that focus on, that we need others to bring on board, right? Not everything can only depend on justice institutions. So how do we create linkages, and how do we really align efforts so that we can, the task is daunting, of course, in your context. So I think this is really a way ahead, but it requires that we also are systematic about it, and that we create these linkages, and that we find the funding for it. So thanks a lot for that. Ahmad, of course, we're ending with you on this. Maybe my most important question for you is, from a victim's perspective, and knowing what you said, that justice doesn't end with a verdict. What does a long-term MHPSS approach look like for you? What should we take into account?
I'm going to mention something from a previous experience. I don't think it would answer all of your, the whole of your question, but I will try to be brief in 30 minutes. So the first recommendation, second, yeah. And the first recommendation, don't hold trials in the winter. For those who don't know, 2 years ago, there was a trial against one of the Syrian generals in Koblenz, based on the universal jurisdiction. After a few months, we had the sentence, and the court had only 21 seats. So we went to the final day to attend the sentence. It was for me fun to be on the different side of the jail for the first time. And we got there at 4 a.m. because it was a limited seating, and I wanted to be there at first. So I went there at 4 a.m. and it was February. You can imagine how cold Koblenz was. I was freezing to death. Who were persecuting, who tortured us, he arrived at 9 in a heated car. So the first recommendation, do not hold trials in winter. But part of the the witnesses in that trial were people from my friends who I shared jail time, some food in prison, and some torture in prison, and part of our network in Ta'afi initiative, our organization. And I saw them after the trial. They were thrilled. They were very happy because that jerk got a lifetime sentence, but they had something in their faces. And I asked them one by one, they all answered the same question. They didn't receive any kind of MHPSS support during or after the trial. And it is exhausting. It's not exhausting because they were telling their story. It was exhausting because they were cross-examined, and they had to go through the stories again and again and again, not in a storytelling way, but in evidence collecting mentality, which is harder than telling the story. So the main recommendation is MHPSS should be provided by the system, not by civil society organizations. And there is a huge difference, because when it is provided by the insurance or by a hospital or by a civil society organization, it is not addressed as a right. It is addressed as a need. When it is provided by the accountability system, it is being seen for the victims that this is your right and you deserve it and you owe it. It's agency again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think that's it. MHPSS is a right, and that's how we should look at it and approach it. Anne, I would like to give you a final comment, and then we open it up for questions. I understand we have half an hour, right?
I think it's a bit shorter. Actually, I would like to hear from the audience. I just want to say I'm very impressed. Thank you, Ahmad, first of all, for sharing this very personal story, for making it so alive, what I was trying to type up so dry. Thank you, Megan and Anna and Marlies. I don't have anything to say. I think the study speaks for itself, and I really want to hear from the audience whether they have comments or questions or anything. Thank you. Yes, so if there are any questions also online, I don't know. I see a hand there. Yes, you want me to pass on the... yeah, sorry, Messina has the microphone.
Hi, thank you so much for this event. My name is Irina Frankova, and my name speaks. I'm from Ukraine. I'm currently working in the Netherlands in the university, and we are integrating MHPSS approach in 3 bordering countries, in Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, for Ukrainians displaced there. And my question actually is to Anne. What kind of challenges you faced on the way of integrating MHPSS into a accountability system? Because first of all, we'll learn a lot from the bottlenecks and those issues. And because we witness now the transfer of this best practice and your experience to Ukraine, and I'm sure to other situations. This is probably the second question about the cultural peculiarities, but please answer the first one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, bottlenecks, challenges. Well, we only have a short time, right? I must say, in my career as a psychologist in this field, I experienced plenty of challenges, but they were not big enough to make me stop, but they were big enough to make me sometimes doubt whether this was the right way. But I think the challenges are less if you can rely on a strong legal framework. And this is what I was lucky. I was lucky that I was in the Special Court for Sierra Leone, where my job was in the statute. I was lucky to arrive at the ICC, where my job was in the statute. So even if I had people around me who didn't believe in it, and there's still plenty, unfortunately, who saw my work as a luxury or as unnecessary or as a waste of time for the case, the fact that it was in the legal framework made it impossible to ignore the work we do. And I think that is the advice I would give you is that, and that's also what I like to hear about the Ukraine example, is that it's a top-down approach. It's an approach which is by the management installed and which is mandatory, and no matter how you feel about it, this is the way to go. And this is how it should be. So no matter what the context is, you first need to get the framework right. You need to make sure that it is structurally integrated. And now just hiring a psychologist will not do the trick. You need to have a structure, and you need to have the expertise in your leadership. Thanks.
And then we move to you, Renette.
Good evening, and thank you very much for this panel. I am Raluca Popa from the International Development Law Organization, IDLO. I have a question for Anna, and it's about the recent mechanism of reparations that was adopted by Ukraine, and for which Ukraine was, that made kind of big news. And I want to ask if and how an MHPSS approach will also be included in the reparations mechanism, because I think that if I understood correctly, and reparations might be awarded as a form of compensation, that's not necessarily the right approach, because reparations, I think, should also include a long-term MHPSS support for victims. And I don't have a question, but I just want to tell Ahmed how inspiring his intervention was, and that I think we will now all wait for a call from Islam.
Thank you very much. I think before we move to Anna, let's take a couple of questions so that we're very efficient with our time. Are there, Renette, you said you have a question, and then if there's other questions from the room, I see there one in the back, and then we go do a round with the panelists.
So thank you very much. And this is a question which came up when you presented your findings or your recommendations. And there's a question: is there a reason you are not using Danieli's term of reparative justice to describe the context of your work rather than restorative justice, which originated in integrating offenders back into their communities, and transitional justice? So it's it's not only technical, it's also about the how do you approach victims, agency. There's a discussion about that in the chat. Thank you.
Were there questions, Renette, in the chat? Okay, so I saw a question there in the back.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Jelena Vujanovic from Punity Watch, and I would like to ask Anne if you think that peer-to-peer, basically MHPSS support or community-based PSS support would be also one of the suggested, I would say, approaches, because we have victims being exposed to all this unfamiliar process, right, which is many times very lengthy. And I think MHPSS expert potentially can provide individual support, but then if we promote the peer-to-peer support, putting victims in contact with other victims who have already been through similar process, might be also part of the overall, I would say, well-being or long-term support. Is this something that you consider, or if we have tried something like that? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
All right, are there other questions? If not, there's one more there. And then I propose we do a last round with all the panelists, and then we close it up. I just want to repeat, I'm so grateful for your humanity. You know, I think these are such intense topics, and hearing victims speak, it is, you know, this is what we're speaking about. And I think it's important that we continue to feel and express that. So I'm really very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth Baumgartner, I'm from the Facility on Justice and Conflict and Transition, financed by the EU. And my question links a bit but on the peer-to-peer, and also, Marlies, what you mentioned with regards to the longer term and what goes beyond a trial. And my question is, how much are you thinking and working around the issue of referring, instead of having psychologists in the mechanism, rather referring victims to existing service providers, which would then continue giving support, and which could also strengthen actually the local network of service providers.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I now propose we do a round along our participants. Maybe if everyone can give like 2 minutes of answers. I'm making a quick calculation. And I think there was one question, and I would like to start with you, specifically directed to you. But if there's other questions that I think both of you can also really relate to, then please feel free to comment. And any final points that you think are important to mention are welcome within the 2 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you, Rolka, for your question. Very pleased to see you there. About reparation system, very shortly, there is not adopted in Ukraine, but yes, there is a draft of law As of now, member of Ukrainian Parliament and other Ukrainian members of parliaments have introduced the draft of law of Ukraine. It's titled like on the status of victims of sexual violence related to the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and urgent interim reparation. And as you understand from the title, that is about interim reparation in the form of money compensation. But I have to say that there will be a project and this money compensation will be provided for 500 of those who suffered from conflict-related sexual violence, and that is a project of our government and state institutional. And just briefly inform you about this referral mechanism that it was a last question from the audience. So the system of reparation in some kind of it exists in Ukraine, and currently our state, even with ongoing conflict, provides a system to the victim of CRSV, and they receive it in the survival relief center, which were created with the assistance of the UNFPA, and they offer also legal, psychological, medical, and other humanitarian aid as well. So we collaborate with them, and we also have this referral mechanism, and if needed, we also may provide our victims with a special support from that institution.
Thanks, Anna. Megan?
I don't think there was a specific question for me, but I was really interested in the point about referrals.
I think you have something to say about that. And also, if you feel something you wanted to say and you couldn't say, this is your moment.
I don't want to take up too much more time. The thing about referrals is I really hear the point that was made about continuity and also building more of the capacity in the context where people live. And I think the other point to it, of course, is that it seems obvious to me anyway, without being a professional in this area, that it's better for people to have assistance from someone who is from their own culture and speaks their own language. The struggle is always that the services are simply not there in the communities where we're trying to work. And actually the sad thing is that it's true that people often do kind of come to try and engage with the ICC or similar mechanisms, partly because they see it as potentially a pathway to services which aren't otherwise available. And so I think ideally, it also shows the difficulty that we have when, we put our resources and our energy, our funding into an institution like the ICC in an isolated way, because actually the communities where the ICC is trying to work also need money for their permanent, not only money, but also support, technical expertise, everything that's needed over the long term to build up those institutions. Because with our clients, we would ideally really like to be able to refer them to service providers who can help them in the long term in a way that's not connected to their engagement with the court. But unfortunately, those mechanisms are generally not available.
Thanks, Megan. That was not a very encouraging last comment, but it's the reality and we need to think about it, which speaks to that this is not the end of the conversation, right? I mean, more thinking needs to be put into this, but this is such an important first step. Ahmed, I'm going to you.
So quickly on the referral question, first, thank you for your nice words. On the referral system, we do refer cases to specialists, but what we found that sometimes we need experts on specific fields. So I learned that there is experts that knows how to deal with victims of torture in particular, which is not very much available of resources. Also on the peer-to-peer support, in our work, we found that the majority of the survivors that we work with outside of Syria, they ask for MHPSS support, while those who are still in Syria, they don't. And we thought because those who are still in Syria, they are still in the trauma, so they don't have the PTSD, while the rest already settled. So they are post. But our study found that in Syria, they still have a community. They still have peers who support them, while outside they don't. That's why we are creating now virtual realities, not like the Facebook one, but we have communities of survivors. We communicate online every now and then to support each other. Finally, on the systematic change that we need to do in the structure of the institutions, we are developing with your support. With Impunity Watch's support, I'm struggling with the P. In Arabic, we don't have the letter P. So with the support of Impunity Watch, we are developing a policy on how to integrate victim support and how to interact with victims into the structure of institutions, and how to empower agency, and how to avoid something called the carbon drama trap. In 2 years, we'll finish it and we'll share it with you if we are still alive.
Thank you, Ahmad. I'm looking forward to reading that. Yes, the questions to me, thank you so much. Let me start with the peer-to-peer support and the referral. Yes, it's incredibly important. And what I set up there in the beginning was just a little fraction of the study in the interest of time. But if you read it, you will see that we adapted the model, the pyramid model of the Interagency Standing Committee, which is clearly presenting MHPSS as a layered approach. And we talk a lot about psychologists here for a good reason, I will come to that. But in fact, most of the MHPSS approach is done in other ways. And one of these ways is the peer-to-peer support in communities. And I think what you say, Ahmad, I can perfectly picture that if people have their community, they go through their community, and that it's how it should be. And then we should support the communities to provide each other. This is how it means that there is still functioning social fabric, and we should promote that. So that is one thing, it is in the study. However, what I do want to point out, what is particular about accountability mechanisms is that, and that's another paradox, that we have an obligation to protect witnesses. And one of the first things we tell witnesses when they agree to be a witness is you cannot talk about being a witness because you put yourself at risk, which automatically cuts out the whole community side. And for us, and I see my colleague nodding in there, it is one of our biggest challenges because by default, we isolate people from their community, which is why we rely in accountability mechanisms like the ICC, but also others. You need to do things individually because you cannot count on a community of much less, because people would really put themselves at risk. And if we need to start putting protective measures in place, their mental health goes even further down. So that's a particularity about the system we're in. About referral system, yes, we actively use referral systems. Our responsibility never ends with witnesses. If they, after the testimony, select, because of the fact that they were witnesses, we continue to have a responsibility, and we refer whenever we can. To specialists, but also to other, whatever, spiritual systems, whatever is available and whatever is helpful, a lot of NGOs as well. The question about restorative justice and reparative justice, and so I just want to highlight, I'm kind of honored you ask me this, because I think you project, whoever asked me this projects a whole lot of expectations in this study, and I think, oh my God, this is a study with a very limited scope. So I did not have the intention to write the ultimate guide on what victims need, victims of atrocity crimes, and what is the best form of justice. I really started as a practitioner for my own reality in the ICC and from hearing my colleagues in other accountability mechanisms, knowing that these processes are still very retributive in nature. And as Marlies said, they're still very focused on perpetrators. But that's the reality we are facing, and we are trying to change it, but still there, within that reality, where victims and witnesses come forward and they need their testimony, how can we change that it becomes a more healing experience? So I think I appreciate the academic debate about it, and I'm very willing to go on about it, but that's a topic of another study, I'm afraid. But thank you, thank you.
It's work in progress. And I have a last question for you. What do you take out of these discussions that we had? What's the next steps? What's the way forward?
Thank you. First of all, I take out a big sense of gratitude for all of you to be here for 2 hours and for your enthusiasm. Also all the people online who are very virtual. We have no idea how many they are at the moment, but so that's what I take. Yeah, I very much appreciate the feedback which has been there from the beginning, in fact. And what I learned from that is that there is an enormous momentum about MHPSS. Otherwise, this study would not have been such a snowball, so to say. We wouldn't be so many people here today. So that's, for me, the next step is really to consolidate this. And I really think I'm very much looking at government representatives who have to kind of also put this forward and kind of demand it in their, when they fund projects, when they support institutions, because it's because of the external pressure and the external drive that there will be resources, and it will be. And we've seen it recently. Evelyn and I have made a submission for the new Syrian, together with many other people, for the new Syrian mechanism on missing persons. And also there, you see there is need for ongoing pressure to make MHPSS a priority. So that's what I take forward, that it can no longer be just us. There is need for a big community to drive this forward. But thank you so much. I'm optimistic though, if I see you all. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot for that. And I think you're right? I mean, coherence is also that we put our money where the words is. And if we find this important, that coherence, that support also needs to be articulated. So it's amazing, when we started, I thought, oh, 2 hours is so long. Now I think 2 hours is so short. And I also like the definition of Megan of 1 minute. But I want to thank you all. Maybe just a couple of highlights from what we said, right? I think that is important to highlight. I think, as you say, you know, that there is a momentum for integrating MHPSS approaches. I think that is important, and I think we need to build on that momentum and push it further. As Anne says, it helps when we have a strong legal framework that articulates that, and I think that is really important within the RCC, but there is justice taking place, accountability mechanisms on so many levels, and we see really big differences. So this should be pushed to make it more integral to these different mechanisms. I think, you know, what is really important before saying anything else, that when we talk about MHPSS, we talk about humans, we talk about incredible sufferings of crimes, and it requires humanity. It requires a human approach. It requires solidarity. And I think we can never leave that out, how legal we get, but this is really what drives us to make things better. I love the point on the agency. I think the agency is so important, and I always cringe a little bit, you know, when I read a lot about people being very vulnerable. We see that people suffer horrific person. I see here someone who is an agent who is still making change and transformation, and we have a lot to learn from that. So please, let's put them in that agency and support them in that role. And I think that requires this focus, you know, rather than on the output of the justice, it is about a process. How can we do things differently so that we make the process meaningful, that we make the how meaningful, and that will create more longer-term results than just focusing on getting a verdict, which might be overhauled in a year later down the line. And what you said, Ahmad, justice is more than just a verdict. It's a comprehensive perspective. So an MHPSS lens, if we really are serious about it, it means that we also take, you know, that perspective on what justice means. So the referral, the peer-to-peer, you know, the other sort of mechanisms, to not make this only something about the court, although I heard you about it's a right? So MHPSS is a right, and it requires the institutions to be involved, but it also requires solidarity, support, and we need to think about this a little bit more so that we don't work in silos and make the connections and join the dots. I think I'll stop here, but I don't stop before giving the floor to Natalie again, who I'm not sure. Oh, she's not there anymore. So now I'm very happy to give the floor to Renette, who has been such a driver behind this. And I think we need some policy statements on how the Dutch are going to take this forward. At this very dark day when we are getting a new government who don't seem to be very supportive for this. And she needs some MHPSS after this as well.
Thank you, Marlies. You've put me on the spot there. First of all, I want to truly thank you all. And especially also in name of Natalie. She had to step out earlier because she had to go to a debate in Parliament, because even today there are debates in Parliament, and the debate started earlier than was foreseen. So that is why she couldn't remain until this moment. But she's here in her mind and in her heart, and she's with all you in your work and in also your experiences. And she wrote down some small notes. Now I need to take off my glasses. She also was very, very impressed by your power, by your force, Ahmed, and she thanks you for that. And I think that goes for all of us. And even if the word victim is often used, I think it's about survivors, and it's about powerful survivors. It's indeed about agency, which is so important, and which is why we as governments, we need to create the space that is needed. We need to create the demand, so that's the governmental demand, of organizations that work on this, and indeed of systems that work on this, because I have also very well heard what you said. It needs to be provided, MHPSS, as part of the system because it's a right, not because it's a kind thing to come provide as an afterthought. It's a right that should be there from the very beginning, but then it should also really be factored into human resources policies, into the training of people working in those systems, etc. And that is why we are really proud of this paper, because it's not a paper, it's a set of calls to action. It's a set of very actionable and also maybe ambitious but realistic, feasible recommendations. So I would really, and again, returning to the point of this needs to be provided by the system, by more, but by the system. So really call on all of you tonight to reflect on what each of you can do in your own respective responsibilities. What can we do together? What can you do? How can we work with that community of practice that you're trying to set up? How can we help provide and make that space, and thus enable that agency? And I think that's really what's a joint responsibility. I very much want to thank all of you who have shared your thoughts, who have shared your and who have shared your time as well as all of you in the audience and at home or in offices. There are flowers there, but I'm not going to take them now because it's too complicated. Because I thought today I want to give each of you a flower. I couldn't bring 100 flowers, but I wanted to share with others, with those in the audience as well, because we're sharing this responsibility, and we're trying to share. We can never, of course, but we try to carry with you the pain, Ahmed, and we share, again, the responsibility to keep on working, and we will share some of those flowers. Now, I hope you will join us for a drink to share experience.
They're going to put up a QR code on the screen, and that is the link with which, if you scan it with your phone, you can find the online version of Anne's report with clickable links to resources. Thank you.
And so please share that, spread it to others. thank you very much, Anne. Congratulations, if that's the type of word for this. But thank you all very much. Also, Messina, Evelyn, and see you on the other side of the room. Thank you.